All right, now we got him. Good, that's good. Where's my wife at? Where are the girls at? In the house. Asleep. Are you sure? Yeah, I checked. The master bedroom was empty. Only a pair of Shanann's high heels lay abandoned on the floor where she'd left them that morning. Her phone was missing, too. She never left the house without it. Her car was still parked in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. And then there was the nursery. The crib was neatly made. One of Bella's shoes was on the floor where she'd taken it off to play. But Bella was nowhere to be seen. Same for Celeste. It wasn't like Shanann to leave her girls, especially not without telling me where she was going or saying goodbye. Something was wrong here. I could feel it in my gut. But what? Was this some kind of bizarre game? Had someone kidnapped them? My mind was racing, but there was only one way to find out what happened. I needed to talk to Chris Watts. Now, this is the host, and this is an actual case, the case of the Watts family murders. Now, before we begin, a content warning for this episode. This case involves sensitive details of violence against women and children. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to Case Vault. On the outside, Chris and Shanann Watts seemed like the perfect American family. A beautiful home in Frederick, Colorado, 2 adorable little girls, and another baby on the way. Shanann often shared her life online, smiling family photos, loving posts about her husband, and videos with her daughters Bella and Celeste. But on August 13, 2018, that picture-perfect life shattered. Shanann and her 2 girls disappeared without a trace. Within days, Chris Watts, the seemingly devoted husband and father, would confess to one of the most chilling crimes in modern American history: the murder of his pregnant wife and daughters. This is the story of the Watts family murders. Part 1. Shattered Family. August 13, 2018 was a Monday. Shanann had just returned home from a work trip. She'd been traveling the country, visiting children's hospitals, something she loved doing. According to her social media posts, she was excited to be back home after so many weeks on the road. That Monday morning, Shanann posted a video of herself and her 2 daughters making breakfast together. "Good morning, my loves," she said into the camera. "What are we making today?" she asked Bella and Celeste. "Pancakes," they replied in unison. Shanann was working on her online business and caring for her 2 girls. Chris was working his job in construction. Everything seemed normal, almost idyllic. When Shanann came home that evening, she found a series of text messages on Chris's phone from a woman named Nicholas. Who was she? What did she want? Shanann confronted Chris. He told her it was just a co-worker. Shanann didn't believe him. The 2 argued. At around 5:20 p.m., Shanann called her friend and confidant, describing how angry she was at Chris. "He's been hiding this woman for months," she said. Then Shanann hung up the phone and sent a text message to her friend. "I don't even know what to do anymore." This was the last time anyone would hear from Shanann, Bella, or Celeste. The next day, Shanann's mother, Pamela, grew worried when her daughter didn't show up for her weekly call. Pamela tried calling her daughter's phone. It went straight to voicemail. Pamela tried calling Chris's phone. It also went to voicemail. Pamela drove to the house. No one answered the door. She tried again later that night. Still no answer. When Chris finally answered his mother-in-law's call, he told her that Shanann and the girls were in the bedroom sleeping. Pamela didn't buy it. She knew something was wrong. Part 2. The Confession. Chris Watts called his boss on Wednesday morning and told him he couldn't come to work because his wife was missing. His boss thought it odd that Chris didn't seem upset or worried. They talked about the possibility of Chris coming in late. Later that morning, Chris called the police to report his wife and children missing. Within hours, news helicopters were circling the house, their blades beating the hot summer air. As reporters staked out the home, a growing sense of dread filled Chris. He told investigators he hadn't seen his wife since the night before, and that he had no idea who might have taken her. He said he had no enemies that he could think of. Later that evening, after the TV cameras were gone, detectives returned to the house. They brought Chris in for questioning. As the hours passed, his story began to unravel. First, it was just Shanann who was missing. Then Bella was missing too. Celeste, too. Finally, Chris broke down and confessed. He told the police where he'd taken his wife and daughters. The grim details are not for the faint of heart. Chris led the police to an oil work site where he worked. There they found the bodies of Shanann and her 2 girls. Each had been strangled. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave. The girls were in an oil tank. In the end, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. After pleading guilty to murdering his wife and daughters, he was given credit for helping investigators recover the bodies. That helped a bit with the investigation, but it did little to ease the pain felt by those who knew and loved the Watts family. Their lives were shattered forever on that August day in 2018. Have you heard about this case before? If you're just hearing about it now, it really is crazy. Like if you look at the beginning of the relationship between Chris and Shanann, like it looked like everything that you would ever want, right? They were young, in love, married, had kids, pregnant with another baby, and then this happened. It's unbelievable. It's sad. It's dark. There is perhaps no greater shock in the world of true crime than the murder of a pregnant woman. The sanctity of life, the innocence of the unborn, it makes the crime all the more heinous. Such was the case with the Watts family in 2018. But what makes this case particularly disturbing is that the person responsible for ending their lives was someone they trusted. In fact, he was someone they loved. Welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to take a look at the death of the Watts family. Let's get into it. Chris and Shanann Watts' marriage appeared, at least from the outside, to be the embodiment of the American dream. They met in 2010 when Shanann, a strong-willed and ambitious woman from North Carolina, accepted a friend request from Chris on Facebook. At first, she wasn't sure about him. Shanann had been struggling with health problems at the time, and she often said she was at a low point in her life. But Chris seemed patient, gentle, and dependable. He stood by her when others walked away. Over time, their connection deepened, and the two married in 2012. They soon built a family together. Their first daughter, Bella, was born in 2013, followed by Celeste, affectionately nicknamed CC, in 2015. In 2018, Shanann joyfully announced she was pregnant with their third child, a boy they had already named Nico. To the outside world, the Watts family looked picture perfect. A loving husband, a doting wife, 2 beautiful daughters, and a new baby on the way. Shanann worked as a brand promoter for a health and lifestyle company called Thrive, which encouraged its employees to share their lives openly on social media. And Shanann embraced it fully. She posted constantly, videos of her daughters singing, family trips, birthday parties, heartfelt posts about her husband, and smiling selfies. To anyone scrolling through Facebook, the Watts family seemed happy, successful, and deeply in love. Shanann frequently praised Chris in her posts, calling him the best dad ever and a supportive partner. But behind the carefully curated images, cracks were forming. Financial troubles were weighing heavily on the couple. Public records later revealed that Chris and Shanann had filed for bankruptcy in 2015, citing over $70,000 in debt from student loans, credit cards, and unpaid medical bills. Despite having good jobs, Chris worked for an oil company, and Shanann's Thrive income appeared impressive online. They were living beyond their means. The stress of mounting bills, combined with Shanann's frequent business travel, began to strain their marriage. Friends later recalled that while Shanann was outgoing and expressive, Chris was quiet and reserved. Their personalities often clashed. Still, Shanann believed in keeping up appearances. She continued to share glowing posts about her family, even as her private life became more complicated. In 2018, as Shanann celebrated her new pregnancy, Chris was drifting away. He had started working out, losing weight, and paying more attention to his appearance. To Shanann, it seemed like a positive change at first, but soon she noticed he was distant, detached, and less affectionate. She confided in friends that something felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on it. The truth was, Chris was hiding a dark secret. That summer, he had begun an affair with a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. Nicole was intelligent, independent, and adventurous, and Chris quickly became infatuated with her. He began envisioning a future with Nicole, one that did not include his wife and children. He found himself torn between two lives. On one hand, there was the life he had built with Shanann, a respectable, if somewhat strained marriage, 2 young daughters, and a new baby on the way. But then there was Nicole, who represented freedom, excitement, and a chance at something new. For Chris, it was a classic case of being caught between duty and desire. Duty to his family versus desire for a new relationship. Responsibility towards his children versus the allure of starting fresh with Nicole. Guilt gnawed at him. He knew he was betraying Shanann, but the pull of his new romance was too strong to resist. He rationalized his actions, telling himself that he would eventually leave Shanann, that it was only a matter of time before they separated. This false sense of justification allowed him to continue the affair without fully acknowledging the gravity of his actions. Chris began planning his next move, devising ways to escape his current life. He started researching real estate in other cities, looking for a place where he could start over, a place where he and Nicole could build a new life free from his past. Shanann, oblivious to Chris's thoughts, continued to plan for the future. She chose a name for their unborn son, Nicholas, and picked out nursery furniture. She dreamed of the 3 children playing together, of family dinners, and of holidays spent as a bigger, happier family. Little did she know that her husband was planning to take away that future, that he was plotting to destroy the very family she was trying so hard to build. Chris knew he couldn't keep living a double life forever. He had to make a decision, stay in his marriage and be the good husband and father, or leave and be with Nicole. What made this decision even more agonizing for him was that he was about to become a father for the 3rd time. Shanann was nearing her due date, and the thought of taking away the life of their unborn son was particularly troubling. However, Chris's desire for a new life with Nicole outweighed his guilt and responsibility. He decided to end things with Shanann and embark on a new journey with Nicole. On August 13, 2018, just weeks before their 3rd child was due, Chris ended his affair with Nicole. He told her that he couldn't keep seeing her, that his marriage was irretrievably broken down, and that he was going to try to work things out with Shanann. Nicole, shocked by Chris's sudden change of heart, ended their affair on a bittersweet note. She wished him well, knowing that their romantic entanglement was over, but also relieved that their affair was coming to an end. She did not know that Chris had already made up his mind about his future. August 13, 2018 will live in infamy as the day Chris Watts took the life of his wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. It was a horrific tragedy that shocked the nation and left many wondering why. Chris meticulously planned the murders, killing his daughters first and then his wife. He later confessed to the crime, stating that he had ended his affair with Nicole because he felt trapped and wanted to salvage his marriage. However, after killing Shanann and the girls, he disappeared with the bodies, disposing of them in an oil tank at his workplace. When questioned by the police, Chris initially claimed that Shanann had killed their daughters, and then he panicked and killed her. He then changed his story, admitting that he had strangled Shanann after she came at him while he was getting ready to go to work. When asked about the girls, Chris claimed that Shanann had smothered them after a heated argument. He denied any wrongdoing on his part, claiming that he acted in self-defense. However, evidence later proved that Chris was lying. Cell phone data showed that he had been alone at the house when the murders occurred, disproving his claim that Shanann was responsible. Furthermore, Toxicology reports found no trace of any drugs or alcohol in the system of Shanann or the girls, casting doubt on Chris's assertion that Shanann had killed their daughters in a fit of rage. Chris's lies began to unravel, revealing the truth of what happened on that fateful day. In August 2018, Chris pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body, and 3 counts of possession of a financial device that was illegally obtained. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In November 2018, Chris's parents, Randall and Cindy Watts, filed for divorce. So what do you think? Did you find this case interesting? What are your thoughts on the case? If you've been living under a rock, don't click this. Just go hide under your rock some more. But for those of us who couldn't help but peer over the surface, we saw what happened to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts play out in real time. We watched it capture worldwide news cycles and dominate true crime headlines. And then it vanished, seemingly disappearing off the face of the earth along with the prime suspect. Yeah, we're talking about Chris Watts. And while we're on the topic of things disappearing, so are subscribers. So if you love true crime, please make sure you hit subscribe down below. Now let's get started. Chris Watts was always a man of few words, which isn't surprising considering his career choice. He worked for the family-owned company Watts Up, a niche oil and gas trucking business based in North Dakota. Most of the time, he was away from home, driving long hauls across America and Canada. During those times, Shanann handled the lion's share of childcare duties, which led to tension in the relationship. As Shanann's social media posts reveal, she desperately wanted another child and clearly felt that Chris was less than thrilled about the idea. On March 18, 2018, she wrote, "Trying to get pregnant again. Anyone else? Trying. Then, 3 months later, on June, she made a cryptic post comparing herself to the fictional character Cinderella. Many interpreted it as a metaphor for her marriage. Some days you just want to throw on a little makeup, take a hot bath, and feel pretty again. But my life is more like scrubbing toilets and changing diapers and drool and spit up and burp cloths and bottles and rocking a sleeping baby all night long. Maybe someday I'll get my happily ever after." It's hard to read these posts without feeling like Shanann was already foreshadowing her own fate. In her desperate longing for a family, she unwittingly painted a picture of the suffocating and lonely life she was trapped in. Each post turned out to be a chilling prediction of what was to come. Throughout 2018, Shanann continued to hint at the darkness creeping into her marriage. She confided in her friend Nicole about her troubled relationship and how unhappy she'd become. The pair were business partners as well as friends, running a thriving network marketing company together. It was during these work trips that Shanann could escape her problems at home. Even when she traveled, though, the dark cloud of uncertainty followed her. She would FaceTime her daughters as often as possible, but on August 12th, she only had time for a quick hello. It was her last conversation with them. Back at the house in Frederick, Colorado, a sleepy suburb north of Denver, Chris was settling in for what should have been a normal week. Monday meant getting back on the road, hauling oil and natural gas products from North Dakota to Wyoming, but the journey would take only a few days, so he wouldn't be gone long. On Wednesday, he'd be back home with Shanann and the girls, Bella and Celeste. But for now, it was just him, the dog, and the empty house. Meanwhile, Shanann's flight from Phoenix, Arizona, landed late Sunday night, August 12th. She was tired and jet-lagged after a grueling 2-day trip, but she was excited to be reunited with her family. When she touched down, she sent a text message to her mother reading, "Safe and sound, now bring on the wine." 2 hours later, she sent another text, this one to her friend Nicole. "I just got home. I'm so exhausted. Love you. Talk tomorrow. XOXO. Then everything went black. There was a brief window of time between midnight and 2 a.m. when surveillance footage from security cameras outside the house showed Shanann arriving home. She walks up the stairs and fumbles with her keys as she tries to open the front door. A suitcase, two matching rolling carry-ons, and her purse drag along the pavement behind her. The footage shows Shanann struggling to get inside, even dropping her suitcase briefly as she fumbles. Finally, she gets the door open and disappears from view. At some point, Shanann was able to get her luggage inside, but she never made it far. The killer had likely ambushed her at the front door, dragging her inside and disposing of her belongings outside in the moments before security cameras lost sight of her. At this point, the exact sequence of events is unknown. However, it was sometime between 2:04 and 2:40 a.m. that Shanann sent a series of text messages to her friend Jessica. They read, "Tired. Didn't think I was gonna make it. Thank you for listening. Love you. Night." Jessica replied, "No problem. You okay?" But Shanann never answered. In the meantime, Chris was alone in the truck, driving toward his next assignment in Wyoming. He was 78 miles away when he received a call from Shanann. We know this because he kept the call log on his mobile device, which was later seized by the police. The records indicate the first call came in at 2:49 a.m., then another one at 4:26 a.m., followed by a third call at 6:26 a.m. Chris didn't answer any of them. He did send a text message at 7:42 a.m., though, writing, "On my way." But it wasn't directed at Shanann. It was to his boss. The question is, what did Chris do after receiving those calls from Shanann? It's a question that tormented investigators for weeks. After all, Chris himself was out of the immediate area. He wasn't even back home yet. Why would he have been expecting Shanann to be waiting at the door? Why didn't he answer her call? And why did he bother to update his boss when Shanann was reaching out to him frantically in the middle of the night? When Chris reached his destination in Wyoming, he promptly checked his mobile device, this time answering a phone call from his father-in-law, James. They spoke for 14 minutes. Why was Chris talking to Shanann's father? He hadn't spoken to him in months. After hanging up, he called his brother-in-law, Ian, speaking to him for nearly 20 minutes. Chris needed more than small talk. He called his mother, then Shanann's sister, Melinda. What was going on? Was he gathering the family to break some kind of good news? Or was he orchestrating something far more sinister? By the time Chris hung up his final call with his mother, it was 11:20 a.m., which brings us to the question, where was Chris during this time? If he had driven straight from North Dakota to his meeting in Wyoming without stopping for anything, he should have arrived around 9:50 a.m., leaving him 20 minutes of free time to call his mother. But that's assuming he'd been driving non-stop, which was not the case. His route took him through various oil fields, including one near Rifle, Colorado, where he stopped at a truck stop convenience store to refuel and use the restroom. While he was there, he used his mobile device to call his boss and his brother-in-law, both conversations lasting a minute or two. The brother-in-law call ended at 10:32 a.m., meaning Chris had plenty of time to drive the remaining distance to his destination. And with 15% fuel remaining in his truck, Chris pulled onto the side of Interstate 25 and switched off the engine. He sat there for the next 9 minutes, watching the fuel gauge until it clicked back on. He was almost certainly stalling the engine to keep the GPS inactive and avoid being tracked. Once he resumed driving, he selected a different route, a longer one that kept him away from surveillance cameras and familiar landmarks. When Chris finally arrived at his destination in Wyoming, he was almost an hour late. Nobody seemed to mind except maybe Shanann, but at that point, nobody was looking for her, not even Chris. Chris Watts is a prime example of someone who planned their crime perfectly. When officers arrived at the Watts home on August 13th to perform a welfare check, their body cameras recorded every detail. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed inside the house. But the deeper they looked, the more unsettling the picture became. Shanann's purse was still there. Her medication was untouched. Her shoes were neatly by the door. Most disturbing of all, her phone, the lifeline she used constantly for work and social media, was found inside. For Shanann to leave home without it was unimaginable. Chris tried to explain everything away. On camera, he spoke calmly, almost too calmly. He said maybe Shanann had gone on a play date or to see a friend. His words were soft, rehearsed, and strangely detached. While any other husband might have been frantic, Chris stood with his arms folded, avoiding eye contact, carefully choosing every sentence. The officers then walked out to the garage. Shanann's Lexus was parked inside, and the car seats for Bella and Celeste were still strapped in. The body cam caught the uneasy silence as everyone realized what that meant. Shanann and the girls hadn't driven anywhere. Whatever happened, it happened here. The tension grew when a neighbor offered to show police his surveillance footage. Everyone gathered in the neighbor's living room to review the video. The camera had captured Chris early that morning, backing his truck up to the garage and making several trips in and out of the house. Chris claimed he was simply loading tools for work, but as the footage played, his nervous behavior was obvious. He rocked back and forth, scratched his head, crossed his arms, and talked far more than usual. The neighbor later told officers, "He's not acting right. Something's off with him. Chris never talks this much." These first cracks in Chris's story only deepened at the police station. 2 days later, he sat in the stark, windowless interrogation room. At first, he repeated the same lines. He had gone to work, and when he came back, Shanann and the girls were gone. But detectives had already seen the footage, spoken to neighbors, and noticed the inconsistencies. They pushed harder, asking him to explain why Shanann's personal belongings were still at home. They asked about his marriage. Then they offered him a chance to clear his name, a polygraph test. Chris agreed. He sat down, strapped to the machine, breathing heavily. Within hours, the results came back. He had failed. Detectives confronted him directly. One leaned in and said firmly, "There's no way you can sit here and tell me you had nothing to do with this. We know you're lying." For the first time, Chris's mask began to slip. His confident, calm demeanor cracked, replaced with silence and nervous fidgeting. The body cam footage, the neighbor's suspicions, and now the interrogation room pressure all pointed in the same direction. The devoted husband everyone thought they knew was hiding a horrifying secret. Welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be looking at the case of Chris Watts. As always, this is based on court documents and police reports. So let's get into it. After Chris failed the polygraph, his demeanor changed dramatically. After being read his rights, Chris finally broke down and admitted to killing his wife, Shanann, but claimed it was in self-defense. According to Chris, Shanann had come at him while he was in the shower and proposed a separation. In a fit of rage, he strangled her. He then went on to say that after he realized what he had done, he panicked, put her in the oil tank, and then returned to work. He confessed to smothering Bella and Celeste because he did not want them growing up without a father. When he was done with his statement, he cried uncontrollably, saying over and over again, "I killed my girls! I killed my girls!" He then asked to call his mother, who arrived shortly after and cradled her son as he continued to cry. While the police were at the station interviewing Chris, Shanann's friend, Nicole McCrae, was trying to get in touch with her. She called Shanann multiple times throughout the day, but there was no answer. It wasn't like Shanann to not answer or return calls, so she was getting worried. After not hearing from her friend, Nicole decided to go to the Watts house to check on her. When she got there, she noticed that the garage door opener was left open. When she knocked on the front door, Chris answered. He appeared distraught and told Nichols that Shanann had taken the girls and left. Nichols noticed that he seemed to be holding something behind his back and was acting very strange. Nichols took this to mean that Chris was hiding something, so she asked to look around the backyard. Chris quickly shut her down, telling her that it would be a violation of privacy. Nichols accepted that and went home, still concerned for her friends. Meanwhile, the police had gotten a search warrant and returned to the Watts home. This time, they were looking for the bodies of Shanann and the girls. When they entered the home, the stench of death hit them immediately. They searched through the house, finding nothing until they reached the basement. There, hidden under a tarp, were the bodies of Shanann and her 2 daughters. The police were horrified. This was one of the worst cases they had ever dealt with. As they investigated further, they found out that Chris had been having an affair for months. In fact, the night before he murdered his family, he had gone out with his mistress and told her that his wife was pregnant. What he didn't tell her was that Shanann was also pregnant. He had been planning this for a long time, even going as far as to buy life insurance policies on his wife and children. He had also been searching Google for topics such as, "What if my wife dies?" and "How to collect life insurance benefits." All of this evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened. Chris had killed his wife and daughters for money. At his trial, the prosecution played up the betrayal. They showed how Chris had been leading a double life and had been cheating on his wife. They also showed how he had planned this meticulously and had even taken out life insurance policies on his family. The defense tried to argue that Chris had acted in self-defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Chris guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. In the end, the truth was revealed. Chris Watts was not the loving husband and father that he had portrayed himself to be. Instead, he was a cold-blooded killer who was willing to do anything to get money. The case shocked the nation and raised questions about how someone could live such a double life. Even today, people are still trying to understand what could have possessed Chris Watts to do what he did. He is a husband, a father, an employee of the month, a model citizen who called for help when his wife and children went missing. But behind closed doors, he's a cruel manipulator who betrayed his wife's trust and took the lives of his precious children. This is the story of Chris Watts, the man who killed his own family. The year was 2018, and Chris Watts's life appeared to be the epitome of the American dream. He had a loving wife, 2 beautiful daughters, and a successful career as an operator at an oil company in Colorado. He was the kind of guy who took care of his lawn and entered barbecue competitions with his famous beef brisket. He was also the kind of guy who would call 911 and report his wife and children missing. It was August. Chris had been alone for 2 days working on an oil rig. On the night before, he had taken a cab home because he had failed a drug test at work and did not want the police to find drugs in his system. According to Chris, he had arrived home around 2 a.m. to discover his wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, gone. The only thing that was out of place was the garage door, which was slightly ajar. As he stood on the driveway talking to the police, Chris was a picture of concern. He begged them to find his family, assuring them that he loved his wife and children more than anything in the world. But something about his story didn't add up. And as the days passed without any trace of the missing family, suspicion began to fall on Chris. At first, it was just a nagging feeling in the back of Detective Tammy Lee's mind. She couldn't shake off the image of Chris standing in front of the house, a house that seemed too neat, too tidy, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened there at all. Then came the polygraph test. Chris volunteered for it, almost too eager to prove his innocence. He insisted that he hadn't killed his wife or children, adding that he would take a lie detector test to prove it. It was a bold move. But as Lee and her partner, Detective Justin Haubert, prepared the questions, they could sense that they were dealing with someone who was hiding something. The test began, and Chris answered question after question about his family, about his job, about his life. Each answer carefully measured, each pause dissected by the 2 detectives. Finally, they asked him the direct, "Did you kill your wife, Shanann?" Chris responded, "No, I didn't." But as soon as the words left his mouth, the machine beeped, indicating deception. Lee and Haubert exchanged a look. They already had a feeling, but now it was confirmed. Chris was lying. "There's no way you can sit here and tell me you had nothing to do with this. You failed the test," Haubert said, his voice leaving no room for argument. In that moment, something shifted in the stark interrogation room. The mask that Chris had worn so meticulously, the concerned husband, the devoted father, it all fell away, leaving behind a shell of the man he had been. His head dropped, his voice trembled, and he asked for his dad, Ronnie, to be brought in. When Ronnie entered the room, the detective saw a change in Chris. He was no longer the cool, collected individual who had faced the police with a calm demeanor. Now he was vulnerable, relying on his father for support. It was then that Chris finally admitted that Shanann was gone. He told his father, "I messed up." And then he uttered the words that would send chills down the spine of every person in the room. "I killed her." Over the next 2 days, the truth emerged in fragments. A grim tale of betrayal, deceit, and unimaginable violence. Initially, Chris had claimed that he had acted in self-defense. He alleged that he had returned home to find Shanann strangling their daughters. In a fit of rage, he claimed to have lost control and strangled her to death. But detectives knew this was another lie. They had already found signs of a struggle in the master bedroom, signs that contradicted Chris's story. Then there were the injuries on his daughters. Injuries that suggested a brutal assault, not a peaceful slumber. Slowly but surely, Lee and Halbert peeled back the layers of Chris's lies until he finally confessed fully. And what he revealed was a horrifying picture of a man consumed by darkness. The detectives pieced together the timeline of the crime. It started on August 13th after Shanann returned from her work trip. Chris told her he wanted a divorce. When Shanann questioned why, he responded, "You know why." Shanann tried to make sense of it, but he cut her off saying, "This isn't a discussion." An argument ensued, escalating until they reached their bedroom. There, in the privacy of their own space, Chris strangled Shanann to death while she was 15 weeks pregnant with their son, Nico. Chris then made a gruesome decision. He placed Shanann's body in the back of his truck and drove to a remote oil site owned by his company. There, hidden in the shadows of massive storage tanks, he dug a shallow grave and buried her remains. But his horror didn't end there. Chris returned home, ostensibly to collect himself. He cleaned up, changed his clothes, and prepared breakfast for his unsuspecting daughters. When they asked about their mother, he lied, saying that she was on a business trip. Then he led them to the truck, ostensibly to go to the park. Instead, he drove them to the same oil site where he had buried Shanann. One by one, he smothered his girls, first Celeste, then Bella, before disposing of their small bodies inside the oil tanks. By the time the sun set on August 15th, Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts were no more, their lives extinguished by the very person who should have loved and protected them the most. In the wake of the tragedy, many questions were raised. How could someone like Chris Watts, a seemingly upstanding citizen, commit such heinous acts? What drove him to end the lives of his own children? The answers, as they often are, lay in the complexities of the human psyche, a realm where darkness and light intertwine in the most unsettling ways. For Chris Watts, the road to darkness was paved with deceit. From the moment he reported his family missing, he projected an image of the grieving husband, the sorrowful father. He spoke of his love for Shanann and the joy his daughters brought him, all the while concealing the sinister truth. His facade was so convincing that it fooled not only the public, but even the police for a while. It wasn't until he agreed to take a polygraph test that the cracks in his story began to show. Faced with the undeniable evidence of his deception, Chris's composure crumbled, and it was in that moment of emotional vulnerability that the detective saw a glimpse of the monster that lurked beneath the surface. The motive for the crime remains a chilling enigma. Chris's confession provided a partial glimpse, revealing a man driven by selfish desires and a thirst for a new life. His confession painted a picture of a troubled marriage, one that had reached a breaking point. But it offered no explanation for the brutal murder of his innocent daughters. Perhaps in the twisted logic of Chris's mind, he saw his daughters as obstacles, impediments to his desire for a fresh start. Or maybe Just maybe, he believed he was protecting them from a world he deemed too cruel. Whatever his reasons, they offer no solace, no justification for the horrific actions he took. As the trial commenced, the true colors of Chris Watts became evident. He displayed no remorse, no empathy for the pain he had inflicted on so many. Instead, he seemed detached, almost robotic in his delivery as he recounted the chilling details of the crime. It was a performance that disgusted many and left the courtroom in stunned silence. In the end, justice was served. Chris Watts was convicted of all charges against him and sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, the world watched, hoping for a flicker of remorse, a shred of humanity. But all they saw was a cold, calculating stare. The Watts family murder case remains a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most ordinary of places, a stark testament to the fragility of life and the depths of human depravity. It serves as a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters wear the most charming of smiles. On August 13, 2018, a neighbor noticed a strange white van parked outside the home of Chris and Shanann Watts at around 2 p.m. It was an oddity because she knew Chris was out at work and Shanann wasn't due to be back from her business trip until later that evening. The neighborhood was one where front doors were often left unlocked and children roamed free, so the neighbor didn't think much of it. She waved to Chris when she saw him on his porch, assumed Shanann was inside, and went on with her day. What she didn't know was that in that house on the corner of Skyline Drive, something terrible had already happened. Inside the home, the lifeless bodies of 34-year-old Shanann Watts, her 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, and their unborn baby boy Nico lay hidden. Their killer, Chris Watts, was about to return home alone. Chris arrived around 5:30 p.m. carrying a pizza. According to his later testimony, he expected Shanann to be angry that he'd brought food instead of going out with her to celebrate her return. That anger turned out to be the last thing he expected. When he opened the door, he found Shanann lying dead on the floor with the girls missing. Shocked and panicked, he searched for them, calling their names, then called 911 to report them missing. Over the next few hours, police scoured the neighborhood, helicopters whirred overhead, and neighbors stood in small groups, exchanging anxious whispers. As dusk fell, Chris joined Shanann's parents and brother at their home, sharing tearful hugs and promising to help find the girls. A portrait of grief-stricken fatherhood, he told reporters. Whoever took them from us, and we just want them back. His pleas were echoed by a community now gripped with fear. Everyone knew those little girls were not just any children. They were the faces of Frederick, the embodiment of its wholesome charm. Bella and Celeste were star pupils, active in dance and gymnastics, while Shanann was known for her infectious laugh and warm hugs. Chris, with his easy smile and relaxed demeanor, was the perfect husband and father. Or so everyone thought. As night fell and the search continued, more questions arose. How could such a nightmare befall this seemingly idyllic family? Where could the girls be? And why did Shanann seem to have vanished without a trace? In the hours that followed, the answers would come crashing down like a tidal wave, shattering the illusion of safety and revealing the darkness lurking at the heart of the Watts family. At 1:37 a.m. on August 14th, a patrol officer investigating the case noticed a bizarre detail. The tires of the white van spotted by the neighbor were registered to Chris, not Shanann. Back at the family home, the detective found blood on the carpet in the basement and a bloody blanket in the utility room. When questioned, Chris's story started to fall apart. Initially, he said he'd been working all day and Shanann had taken the girls to an amusement park. But when confronted with evidence of his lie, his story changed. He confessed to having an affair and claimed Shanann killed the girls in a fit of rage. He said he came home to find Shanann standing over their dead bodies, and she subsequently asked him to help dispose of the remains. Panicked, he said he strangled her and left the 3 bodies in a remote oil field where he worked. Could this gentle-faced man really be a cold-blooded killer? The police needed to know, and Chris, with his shifting alibis and blood-stained clothes, offered a compelling narrative that was all too believable. But detectives were troubled by some glaring inconsistencies. Why would Shanann kill the girls and leave her own body behind? And why dispose of the remains so close to home if Chris was involved? In the days that followed, the full horror of the Watts murders unfolded. Shanann's family, desperate for answers, spoke out, describing her as a devoted mother and loving daughter whose life revolved around her family. Her brother told reporters she had 2 beautiful daughters and she was pregnant. Her life revolved around those kids. She loved those kids. She loved being a mom. She loved being pregnant, like that was her whole world. The community rallied together, holding vigils and leaving flowers and stuffed animals on the Watts' doorstep. Yet for all the grief and sympathy, questions lingered. Why would a loving mother end her own children's lives? And why implicate her husband in such a heinous crime? Then on August 21st, a break in the case came when one of Chris's co-workers spotted a suspicious blanket in a dumpster near the oil fields. Upon further inspection, it tested positive for the same DNA as Shanann and the girls. Soon after, Chris confessed to disposing of the bodies in this manner. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he led authorities to the burial site where the 3 bodies were found wrapped in the same blanket. The news sent shockwaves far beyond Frederick, Colorado. This quiet suburban town, where families left their doors unlocked and children played freely on the streets, suddenly found itself at the center of one of the most horrifying family murder cases in American history. Neighbors who had once waved to Chris and Shanann from across the street struggled to comprehend what had happened. Just days earlier, Chris had stood calmly on his porch, pleading for the safe return of his wife and daughters. Now everyone knew the truth. The man they thought was a devoted father had destroyed his entire family. With the discovery of the bodies, the investigation shifted into overdrive. Forensics teams descended on the Watts' home, combing through every inch for clues. Cell phone data placed Shanann there the night before, and the presence of blood confirmed the worst fears of the investigators. Meanwhile, Chris, initially portrayed as a doting father, was now the prime suspect. His calm demeanor, once seen as a sign of composure, was now viewed with suspicion. Every word he uttered was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed. Was he hiding something? The pressure mounted as the community grappled with the unthinkable. How could someone living among them be capable of such brutality? The police remained tight-lipped, but the gravity of the situation was evident. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement brought them closer to the truth. They were piecing together a puzzle, one that would reveal the shocking depths of betrayal and deceit. Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 2 for his daughters, 2 for Shanann, and 1 for their unborn son. He also faced charges of unlawful termination of a pregnancy and tampering with a body. The shockwaves of the arrest reverberated through the nation. People everywhere were horrified and saddened by the fate of the Watts family. The image of Chris as a devoted family man turned killer was deeply disturbing. As the investigation deepened, more secrets came to light. The police uncovered a trail of lies and deception that pointed directly to Chris. His confession had unraveled, revealing a sinister truth. Shanann was not the perpetrator. Chris had acted alone. The daughters were strangled, not by their mother's hand, but by their father's. The unborn son was crushed by his father's knee, ending his life before he could draw breath. The horror of it all was unimaginable. In the face of such brutality, the community rallied together. Candles were lit, prayers were offered, and memories shared. Shanann, Bella, and Celeste became symbols of innocence lost, their smiling faces forever etched in the hearts of those who knew them. But amidst the grief and anger, questions still lingered. What had driven Chris to commit such heinous acts? What dark secrets lay within the confines of that suburban home? In November 2018, Chris Watts appeared in court. He chose to avoid trial and instead accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to all charges. The courtroom was filled with Shanann's grieving family, who listened as prosecutors described in chilling detail how Chris had murdered his wife and children. Shanann's mother, father, and brother gave emotional statements, speaking through tears about the daughter and grandchildren they had lost. The judge, visibly shaken by the crimes, sentenced Chris to life in prison. 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 84 years for the other charges. In handing down the sentence, the judge described the murders as the most inhumane and vicious crimes he had ever encountered. For the outside world, the case was closed. But behind prison walls, Chris's story continued in disturbing ways. He began writing letters to journalists and crime authors, offering new details and attempting to explain his mindset. In one letter, he admitted that Bella, his eldest daughter, had fought back, crying, "Daddy, no," before he ended her life. These revelations horrified the public all over again, painting a picture of a man who was not only a killer, but who seemed disturbingly willing to relive the details of his crimes. Chris also claimed he had been influenced by dark thoughts and even described feeling possessed, though many saw these letters as another attempt to deflect responsibility. While Shanann's family sought to honor her memory and raise awareness about domestic violence, Chris spent his days in a Wisconsin prison, cut off from the outside world, except for the occasional letter. The community that once knew the Watts family as just another suburban household would never forget the betrayal. The Watts murders became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder that behind the picture-perfect images we see on social media, darkness can sometimes be hiding in plain sight. Thank you for watching. Go to our website to find us on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe below to get more of our fact-driven, unbiased coverage. In the quiet suburbs of Colorado, a family was torn apart by a nightmare that shattered their idyllic existence. Chris and Shanann Watts, a seemingly happy couple, shared a home with their 2 beautiful daughters, Bella and Celeste. With another baby on the way, they seemed to be living the American dream. Their social media accounts painted a picture of perfection, showcasing a loving marriage and adorable children. But behind the smiling faces and polished Facebook posts, a dark reality was unfolding. Chris and Shanann had been struggling financially, and their marriage was on the rocks. Rumors of infidelity swirled around Chris, creating a rift between him and Shanann. As the cracks in their relationship widened, Chris found solace in an affair, which only added to the turmoil in his life. Unable to confront his demons, he turned to a horrifying solution. In a fit of rage and desperation, he strangled his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 innocent daughters, Bella and Celeste. He then disposed of their bodies, leaving behind a trail of evidence that ultimately led to his capture. What makes this case so disturbing is not only the brutality of the crime, but the betrayal at its core. The person Shanann trusted most, the man her children called Daddy, became their executioner. To many, Chris Watts embodied the chilling idea that evil doesn't always look like a monster. It can hide behind the mask of an ordinary man, a friendly neighbor, even a loving father. The murders forced people to question how well they truly know those around them. How could a husband strangle his pregnant wife? How could a father take the lives of his own daughters, listening to their final pleas for mercy? The answers may never be fully understood. Was it only the affair that drove him? Was it financial pressure? Or was there something darker inside Chris Watts that no one ever saw until it was too late? But amidst the horror, the story of Shanann and her children also became a testament to the strength of family and the power of remembrance. Shanann's family has worked tirelessly to honor her memory and remind the world that she and her children were more than victims. They were vibrant, loving souls whose lives were stolen in an instant. Their tragic tale serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives and the importance of addressing the warning signs that often go unnoticed. As we remember Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, let their story be a catalyst for change, urging us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more vigilant in a world where evil can sometimes hide in plain sight. If you found this case as intriguing as I did, I highly recommend watching another video on my channel about the suspicious death of a popular young mom. Thank you for watching.